So, kicking off the afternoon set of sessions, Jesse Holcomb from the Pew Research Center is going to tell us a little bit about his latest findings. He's really been digging into what has been going on in local journalism for quite some time now, so perhaps there are some trends that we should know about, and he's going to let us know.
Thanks, Dylan. So I'm going to just zoom out a little bit. There's been some great practical, actionable stuff going on this morning, and it's super interesting. I'll just give you the view from Pew. Like Dylan said, we've really made it a priority to study what's happening in terms of the trends in local news, what's happening with audiences, what's happening on the news production side, engagement in local communities. The most recent report that we did that really touches on some of these questions was what we call local news in a digital age. It was actually a series of 3 case studies where we went into different size and different types of markets around the country, and we threw a whole bunch of research methods at it. We wanted to know how people are engaging with local news. We wanted to study what kinds of content was being produced. We went into the Twitter API, Facebook, and all the rest. So we examined it from a whole bunch of different angles. And by the way, anything I touch on in the next few minutes doesn't really scratch your itch, or if you have other kinds of questions that you think would serve your community publishers, or would be useful to you, we're committed to doing this work and studying local news trends and digital trends in the coming years. So let me know if there's something that you're curious about that one of our research reports doesn't necessarily hit on. You never know, it might wind its way into a survey or some kind of another study that we're doing. So we published this report. We looked at Denver, Colorado, Macon, Georgia, Sioux City, Iowa. We wanted to get outside of the East Coast a little bit. Some of these kinds of reports have clustered around the Northeast Corridor, Amtrak corridor. We wanted to get outside of that a little bit and to ask some questions. So we studied different, like I said, different size markets, markets with real different makeups. And one of the reasons we did this, we do a lot of national surveys. We ask about trends, and I think that one of the things that can happen when you're looking at the percentage of U.S. adults who do this or that is this subtle sense that everything's happening, all this kind of change is happening at the same pace at the same time. You see one sort of static number of U.S. adults. What you see in a set of case studies like this is that not every market is the same, and there are unique circumstances, needs, and community features that create a new set of challenges and opportunities depending on the type of market that it is. One thing we see right off the bat, though, is in any of the communities that we've studied, is a really high interest in local news, especially at the neighborhood level, even more than on the metro level. This is something that we've generally seen. U.S. news audiences can be kind of provincial, but you could see that you frame that negatively, but it's also a good reminder that people really care about what's happening in their local community, especially at the neighborhood level. We had enough data that we were able to compare some subpopulations within a couple of the communities that we studied. So in the case of Denver, there was a large enough Hispanic population that we could compare their local news behaviors against the population at large among whites in Denver. In Macon, we were able to do the same thing with the African American community. And in both cases, we found that among both of those populations, strikingly higher interest in local news and neighborhood news than among the white population in those two cities. So once you start to dig and get below the surface, you can see that there are some fault lines within these communities, but they also offer some interesting opportunities for local publishers to meet some of those information needs, especially when it comes to certain topics. Here's just one example, though, where you see a different pace of adaptation to digital tools and information services depending on the community. You might not be surprised to see that a greater share of Denver residents say that the internet is very important in keeping up with local news than in some of the smaller, more rural communities like Sioux City, for instance, in Iowa. One thing that was kind of interesting, though, was to see in a place like Macon, which has strikingly less broadband access and adoption than a place like Denver, less ownership of mobile devices and tablets and other ways of connecting digitally, a higher percentage of the population in that town saying that they get local news through some kind of social media. So you start to see the emergence of platforms like Facebook, more so than Twitter, but Facebook and YouTube being really critical access points, even and especially perhaps for some underserved communities, and getting to know about what's happening in their local community. This is probably no surprise, but it's just a good reminder that local television really dominates the local markets in terms of just blanketing the region. It's on in all these households. Whether or not what you're getting from these broadcasters is really meeting the community's needs is sort of another set of questions, but it's still really important. We see it in these local markets. We see it in the national trend lines as well. Yeah.
All the more reason we should have partnerships with our local TV stations to do stuff and get our logos on the screen.
Yeah, I think it was Josh Benton raised the question of at what point do you see, in terms of legacy institutions and local markets, local TV sort of being the last one standing as local papers continue to cut back. Some of the disruptions they just haven't faced broadcasters the way they have print. So you see a bigger presence for local TV compared to the local daily than you did maybe even 5-6 years ago. You had a question, yes?
We had an experience just recently.
Joe?
You mentioned partnerships with local television stations, and our experience with our local television station is one of resistance to partnering. I think they see that they have more to lose by partnering with us than they have to gain at this point. We've made repeated, attractive proposals to them to partner with us for community good events, co-sponsor. They provide broadcast, we'll provide this.
Nothing. They might be singing a different tune 10 years from now. I don't know. I know Jan has done a fair amount of work looking at some partnerships along these lines. So your work at JLab is a nice resource, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, we have a book available at JLab called News Chops, and actually, I think public media is riper for partnership opportunities right now than commercial media. And they're especially looking to build out their local news reports because they're having concerns about being attached to NPR. And NPR is also competing with NPR. So they're a little more comfortable place to look for partnerships.
I wasn't going to pester you with a question, but
yes,
that was enough in the middle of your presentation.
All right. Also, still low degree of brand recognition for digital-only publishers. So whether that probably represents some kind of a big opportunity, or whether it's a cause for concern, whatever. But in a market like Denver, you have a fair amount of whether they're hobbyists, amateur, or the bigger scale local digital publishers. But when we asked about usage, in our survey of these different kinds of publishers for different kinds of topics, still pretty low sort of general usage. Now, there are always limits to self-reported instruments when it comes to this kind of thing. But the data sort of still tells a bigger kind of story there. What we found in terms of digital publishing and some of these local blogs, local community, digital information sources is that they really are forming these communities of interest, but there's not necessarily a critical mass. They're not pumping out high volume of content. In Denver, we were able to study about 14 what we call digital native news sites. Accounted for less than 10% of the total amount of content in the space of a week. So it's not a lot, but we were able to. We really did sense some passion and interest among some of these smaller communities that really care about what's happening in the art scene in Denver. They know that the art critics have been cut from the number that they once were in local publications. So that's where you see something like denverarts.org pop up. It's a passion project, and it's really sort of meeting a need of these kind of subpopulations within the town. But to take a step back from these case studies, they only sort of tell you so much. One thing that's really worth emphasizing and pointing out again is the growth of social media as a news source, not just for local, but yes, including local. We saw it in our case studies. We see it on the macro level, and it's really something that's happening. It's this generational kind of shift. One of our most recent reports, just from the other week, where we looked at it by generation, you see the majority of millennials getting political or government news from Facebook. And you see baby boomers, 40%. Gen Xers are kind of in the middle. You kind of see which direction it's going. Facebook is really important. Mobile too, among 18 to 29-year-olds. This is from 2013. 58% say they get news on a mobile device, and that number is only going to grow. But as I was saying before, communities they transition at different paces. A lot of factors there. Socioeconomics, like I mentioned, with making broadband access and usage. News culture, too, is all wrapped up in part of this. We looked at how many publishers, that had some kind of a digital presence were linking in their stories. And in Denver, among the digital content we studied, about 31% of stories contained any link. And the vast majority of those were not outbound. So, linking within the news publisher. In Macon and Sioux City, among the digital content we studied, I think it was 2-3% of any story contained any link at all. So, we also did some research on, load times and the speed of these websites, and we haven't published that yet, but I think you can probably guess, what we're finding there. So we know that digital publishers are filling the gap. Groups like Lion and others are doing a good job, actually, Michelle's List and so on, of trying to sort of keep track of what's happening here. I think that's a really good service. It's certainly useful for us as researchers, but you don't have the same kind of trade associations and institutions to help really tabulate and put numbers to this movement. So that's really useful. We've tried to do some research on it too. Found that probably within the past 8 to 10 years or so, we found and thanks to work at JLab's work too, more than 438 publishers or 400 publishers, accounting for almost 2,000 digital jobs. And these are just in digital native community news organizations. So it's really growing, and obviously the role there becomes more critical as the trend line of doom continues to go downward in terms of newspaper newsrooms continuing to cut. We see it at the state house level too. So I think that for someone like me, some of these digital publishers, some of you in the audience, I've been looking at your work for the majority of my adult life. It feels like it almost gives this impression of maturity of this niche to someone like me. But when I take a step back and look at all of this that's happening, it feels like the beginning of something, much more than anything else. So,
let me ask you something personally on that point. How legit as sources of news do you find small indie sites? Because a lot of middle-aged folks are very, very suspicious. It's like, who are these bloggers?
Well, for someone like me, I think other engaged news consumers, I think the transparency of a particular site has become, in some ways, almost code for legitimacy. You know?
Yeah.
So the more information they provide about who they are, even seeing a name, a phone number, or an email address, I think really signals something that there's some kind of hint of accountability here. So that I think, at least for someone like me, and perhaps for others like me,
well, you're a bit more sophisticated of news consumer than a lot of people are.
Well, you can be the judge of
being
that.
your job.
You can be the judge of that. But so I know we've got a lot this afternoon, but I just wanted to share some of those notes and let me know if you have any other reactions or thoughts.
The question I was going to ask was prompted by the slide about TV being the biggest source. Is that, what sort of metric went into deciding that, or what sort of set of metrics? Because everybody has the damn TV on in the background, and that doesn't mean you're really paying attention to it, or becoming, like, how much actual engagement is there with that? Or
that's a good question, and frankly, our measures didn't necessarily pick up on that. Whether it's Nielsen, whether it's a survey, whatever, just knowledge and attention and interest is obviously a totally different beast than engagement. And so in some ways, these are blunt instruments, but they don't get at the kind of thing that a publisher like yours, in this group, would really be especially interested in.
You said 400 sites and 2,000 jobs? Sorry.
So I like your research, but I think you guys have so undercounted.
I know we've had this.
I know we had this discussion. I think the number is more like between 17 and 25,000. I mean, that's how profoundly you have undercounted the numbers of employment. And of course, you're only dealing with about 400 sites, when I think in reality there are more than 2,000 sites out there. So I would just a caveat that I think it's a very underrepresented area.
Yeah, I mean. And that's your sense just on local publishing.
Well, that's if you include. It's just if you include the big guys. I mean, you include.
I know, because I remember having that conversation with you before.
Or it's a Business Insider. I mean, you got about 10,000 now. You got about 7,500 right there. And then if you add the hyperlocals in, even if everyone only has 2 to 3 employees times say 2,000 sites. Got another 4,000 there. I mean, it's a lot more of a robust space than what it's here.
Yeah, I mean, it's arguable. We're pretty transparent about how we counted this stuff. Like I said, there isn't a trade association that is really sort of keeping tabs and that has every single publisher accounted for. So we took a stab at it, and we appreciate the critique. I think
it all comes down to how you're deciding who to count. The potential universe of Lion members is much smaller than what shows up on Michelle's list, because she's counting sites that don't fit our membership criteria.
Right, and
it all
different.
There are many
different lists out there. Although in reality, I think everybody is kind of somewhat doing the same thing. But and you say digitally native, so if you have a print product, you might not be counted. But there are many digital first sites who do have a print product.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying this is the 10 Commandments here. But I think the message that came out when we did publish that research was that we're finally trying to put some more numbers at least to that change the narrative a little bit about what's happening in journalism. You've seen all these other numbers, in declines in newsrooms, and declines in State House reporting. There's something else happening here, and you have some attrition, but you have a lot of growth too, and a fair amount of stability. So, I mean, point
Is there
taken.
something else going on besides the Romanesco drumbeat of layoffs?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Well, if you take the attrition in the professional fellows of what, 35, 40,000 right now. If you have, this is in the neighborhood of 20 to 25,000 new hires in digital startups. You're beginning to close the gap very quickly.
So yeah, I mean, I think one point here is that the numbers and statistics that are easiest to come by are the ones that can define the narrative about what's happening in American journalism. And so, doing research like that, whatever the limitations may be, are an attempt to help, sort of counterbalance that a little bit. So, if we update these numbers and try to take another stab at it, Jan will be the first person that I call.
I just had a question about the Facebook aspect of this and people absorbing news through Facebook, because what I see happening, especially when I look home to West Virginia, is that people are absorbing more news through Facebook and community news through Facebook, but it's not from Channel 12 and it's not from the Times West Virginia and Paramount West Virginia. It's through little pages that people have set up. There's a guy in Martinsburg, West Virginia, who has a page where he just listens to the scanner all day long and posts it online. And he has something like 10,000 likes on that page, just for car crashes and fires. It's not reporting, it's listening to the scanner. And I just wonder, or Jan, if you know, if anybody has done a count of that sort of Facebook community unmoderated journalism, or if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Informal.
There's at least two of them, because we all have exact.
Yeah.
There's at least two, because Mansfield has one doing the exact same.
Right, there's a big one in New Jersey with Katrina, Sandy coverage.
I went to these communities to do some interviews and to talk to some people. When I was at Sioux City, I was talking to a bartender there, and she kind of summed up this transition kind of nicely for me, because we got to talking about how she learns about what's happening in her community, and she said, why would I turn the TV on when I've got lockup buzzing off in my mobile 10 times a day? So I'm like, what's lockup? Lockup Sioux City. You haven't heard of it? It's where everyone goes to see who just got locked up. And it's kind of a brutal. And I think it got shut down actually. It's sort of a brutal space, but at least for her and her her friends, her social network, that to her was a really, really important source of news. Whether it was for fun, whether it was also to legitimately figure out what happened to so and so the other day. So I think there's something to that. Something's happening that, again, also hard to measure, hard to quantify, but probably should be.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.